And I've always had this sort of lifelong love and interest and passion for the world of games and game design. And so it's been quite interesting for me to see over the last couple of years how the sort of world of digital design and the world of game design are sort of coming together. And there's this sort of huge trend of gamification going on where I'm taking the sort of idea of games. I sort of mean games in the really broadest sense. So a lot of people just think about computer games, but also board games, card games, and all sorts of other games. And applying that to sort of their web app. So people like FOURSQUARE and GOWALLA are obviously the poster boys, where they've taken a simple piece of sort of utility and added on badges and points and leaderboards and things you'd normally associate with computer games. And then it's been done by lots of other people. Epic Win is sort of a gamified to-do list. Although interestingly, this has been done by people who are game designers by trade, which is probably not who the usual sort of designers of this are. And that's, I think, what's quite interesting. Then you've also got MINDBLOOM, who have the life game, where you've got this virtual tree with branches representing your career and your health and your happiness. And it blossoms and blooms as you do things, because I think what we all want from a fulfilled and complete life is a virtual tree. So what's going on? Because obviously, while you can be a little bit sort of cynical about some of those examples, they do generally work. Sort of people do become more engaged and sort of use the application in a different way than they might do otherwise. So certainly rewards are something that people plug into and sort of plugs into, I guess, the sort of basis part of our consciousness, and it works for rats as well as it does as people. So you put a rat in a box and you give it some food, if it presses a thing, then it'll press that button over and over again. Status is obviously something which works very well as well, particularly in virtual communities, where you don't have the normal sort of trappings of status that you might have in the real world, where if you see someone with a diamond-encrusted Mercedes, you probably know they've got quite a lot of money to spend. Competition, also a huge element of this, where we've got sort of leaderboards and people being mayors of various coffee shops and workplaces around the place. But I don't think it necessarily has to be as simple as this sort of I win, you lose competition. I think there's a lot more breadth there that people can explore. Which brings me on to sort of what's not going on, because I think that's probably a much more interesting question of what are the things that game designers would routinely think about that we aren't seeing in these sort of gamified apps, because that's where the real opportunities probably lie. So things like interest curves, which apply, I guess, to any sort of media, really. So if you look at a film or a book, you'll certainly see this sort of pattern occurring over and over again, where you've got something climactic at the start and then a lull, and then building up to sort of a climax at the end. But actually, you can sort of slice those up and drive into them. You'll see this sort of fractal pattern where actually, if this is the game, then within each level, you've probably got a little mini curve going on. And similarly, for a film, with each scene, you've got a little mini interest curve going on and on. It's really interesting to think about experiences like that. This is a guy called Sid Meier, the guy who did the Civilization games. And his sort of definition of games is that a game is a series of meaningful choices, which certainly reflects his worldview, but I think if people who design these apps aren't generally giving their users sort of meaningful choices to make about the games that influence the game world. There's also sort of, when I talked about competition, a range of types of conflict or competition. So if you think of this white blob as our game, you've got your single person game, which is, I guess, what a lot of computer games thrive on. You've got player versus player, like a game of chess or drafts, something like that. Then multilateral competition, so everyone against everyone else, which is probably where a lot of these gamified apps are at the moment. We've also got cooperative play, which probably isn't used as much as it could, because it's certainly, if it's done well, is one of the most, the best types of sort of game you can have, and it really works for a lot of people, which is distinct from multiple player versus the game, something like a game of roulette or a game of bingo, where people are playing the game together but individually. Team competition, which we all know from sort of sports particularly, and unilateral competition, where you've got one person versus everyone else, which, again, not useful everywhere, but a really good sort of game when it works well. A mix of goals. World of Warcraft does really well, so at any given point, I might be fighting a badger or something, but I know that's part of my quest to get 10 badger noses, to get to the next level, to get to the next area, to get the, it goes on and on and on. People aren't just focused on one thing at any given time. And finally, narrative, which can be as simple as telling a story, and obviously that's something that, as humans, we just relate to instinctively. But also there's another type of narrative, such as emergent narrative, where the story arises out of the games and procedures that make up the game. So if you take a game of football, where the rules are the same every week, yet millions of people will tune in to watch these narratives emerge from the games over and over again and talk about it in the pub and explore it with their friends. Thank you very much.